The fluorescent lights of Mitchell and Associates flickered overhead as I sat hunched over my desk, reviewing financial projections for the third time that evening. The Manhattan office was nearly empty, save for the cleaning crew making their rounds and the distant hum of traffic 20 floors below. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I barely noticed. The quarterly reports were due tomorrow, and I knew every number had to be perfect. I had been working at this mid-tier consulting firm for 6 years, climbing my way up from junior analyst to senior consultant. The pay was decent, the work challenging enough to keep me engaged, but lately something felt different. There was tension in the air, whispered conversations behind closed doors, and a growing sense that changes were coming whether we were ready or not. My phone buzzed. A text from my girlfriend Lisa. "Still at the office? You missed dinner again." I stared at the message, feeling the familiar pang of guilt. We had been together for 3 years, and lately, our relationship felt like it was running on autopilot. She worked as a nurse at Mount Sinai, pulling her own long shifts, but somehow she always managed to maintain that work-life balance that seemed to elude me completely. I typed back, "Sorry, big presentation tomorrow? We'll make it up to you this weekend." The response came quickly, "You said that last weekend too." Before I could reply, I heard the heavy footsteps of my boss, Robert Harrison, echoing through the hallway. At 52, Robert was the kind of man who wore his authority like an expensive suit, perfectly tailored and impossible to ignore. He had been with the company for 15 years, working his way up to regional director, and he ruled our department with an iron fist wrapped in corporate politeness. "Still here, I see," Robert said as he approached my cubicle. His tie was loosened and there were coffee stains on his white shirt. It had been a long day for everyone. "Just finishing up the Meridian Industries analysis," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "The numbers are looking good. I think they'll be impressed with our cost reduction strategies." Robert leaned against the partition of my cubicle, and I could smell the faint scent of whiskey on his breath. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice lower than usual. I finally looked up, noting the serious expression on his face. "What's going on?" "There's been some talk upstairs," he began, running a hand through his thinning hair. "The partners are looking at restructuring the department. Some positions might be eliminated." My stomach dropped. "Eliminated? But the department is performing well. We exceeded our targets last quarter." "It's not about performance," Robert said, glancing around to make sure we weren't being overheard. "It's about efficiency. They want to streamline operations, maybe outsource some of the analysis work to overseas contractors. It's cheaper." I felt my heart racing. "Are you saying my job is at risk?" "I'm saying everyone's job is at risk," Robert replied, but his tone suggested he was holding something back. "But listen, if you keep your head down, don't make waves, and continue delivering quality work, you'll probably be fine." Probably. The word hung in the air between us like a storm cloud. In corporate speak, probably was about as reassuring as "we'll see" from a parent when you asked for something you really wanted. "I've been with this company for 6 years, Robert," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've never missed a deadline, never had a complaint from a client. My reviews have been excellent." "I know that," he said, straightening his tie. "And that's why I'm giving you the heads up. Just keep doing what you're doing and everything will work out." After Robert left, I sat in the dim light of my monitor, staring at the spreadsheet without really seeing the numbers. 6 years of my life, of late nights and missed dinners, of sacrificing personal time for the promise of advancement and security. And now it could all disappear because some executive in a boardroom decided that quality wasn't as important as saving a few dollars on labor costs. I thought about Lisa's text message, about all the evenings I had chosen work over our relationship, telling myself it was temporary, that the sacrifice would pay off eventually. Now, facing the possibility of unemployment, those missed dinners felt like a waste of precious time. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, determined to present the Meridian Industries analysis with confidence. The client meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and I had prepared extensively, anticipating every possible question and objection. This was the kind of project that could make or break careers, and despite Robert's warning about job cuts, I was determined to prove my value to the company. The conference room filled up gradually. Besides Robert and myself, there were 2 partners from the firm, Patricia Williams and James Mitchell, along with 3 executives from Meridian Industries. Patricia was known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach to business, while James, the senior partner and son of the firm's founder, had a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. I began my presentation with confidence, walking through the financial analysis I had spent weeks perfecting. The cost reduction strategies I had developed could save Meridian Industries nearly $2 million annually while actually improving efficiency in their supply chain. The clients nodded approvingly as I explained each point, asking thoughtful questions that showed they were engaged with the material. Everything was going perfectly until Robert interrupted me mid-sentence. "I think what my colleague is trying to say," Robert said, stepping forward, "is that these projections are somewhat optimistic. We need to be more conservative in our estimates." I felt my face flush with embarrassment and confusion. The projections weren't optimistic. They were based on solid data and conservative assumptions. I had double and triple checked every calculation. "Actually," I said, trying to maintain my composure, "these numbers are based on industry benchmarks and Meridian's historical performance data. I believe they're quite realistic." Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, I think we should present alternative scenarios to give our clients a complete picture." For the next 20 minutes, Robert systematically undermined every point I made, suggesting that my analysis was too aggressive, my assumptions too bold. The clients, who had been enthusiastic moments before, began to look skeptical. Patricia and James exchanged glances that I couldn't interpret, but their expressions had shifted from interested to concerned. By the end of the meeting, what should have been a triumph felt like a disaster. The Meridian executives thanked us politely but said they needed time to consider our proposals. As they filed out of the conference room, I could see the disappointment on their faces. "That could have gone better," Patricia said to James as they gathered their papers. "Indeed," James replied, his eyes briefly meeting mine before he left the room. Robert lingered behind, and once we were alone, his demeanor changed completely. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice barely controlled. "That was me saving you from making promises this company can't keep," Robert replied coldly. "Those weren't promises, they were projections based on solid analysis. You know as well as I do that those numbers were accurate." Robert stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. I don't know who you think you are, but you don't get to show me up in front of clients and partners. You're a senior consultant, not the director of this department." "I wasn't trying to show you up," I protested. "I was presenting the analysis you asked me to prepare." "The analysis was fine," Robert said, his face reddening. "Your attitude was the problem. You think you're so smart, don't you? Think you know better than everyone else." I could feel my own anger building, 6 years of frustration and disappointment bubbling to the surface. "I think I know my job, Robert. And I think I know when someone is sabotaging my work for no good reason." Robert's eyes flashed dangerously. "Sabotaging your work? You arrogant little," he caught himself, glancing toward the door to make sure it was closed. "You know what your problem is? You don't understand your place in this organization." "And what place is that?" "You're nothing," Robert said, his voice rising despite his attempt to whisper. "You're a number on a spreadsheet just like everyone else in this department. And if you think for 1 second that you're indispensable, you're more naive than I thought." The words hit me like a physical blow. In 6 years of working for Robert, he had never spoken to me with such naked contempt. We had disagreed before, certainly, but this felt different. This felt personal. "You're nothing." The phrase echoed in my mind as I stared at my boss, this man I had respected and tried to emulate for so many years. In that moment, I saw him clearly for what he was. A mediocre manager who had risen to his level of incompetence and now spent his energy protecting his territory rather than growing the business. "If that's how you really feel," I said quietly, "then maybe it's time for me to find somewhere else where I'm appreciated." Robert's expression shifted slightly, as if he realized he had gone too far. "Now hold on, let's not be hasty. I was just trying to make a point about." "The point is clear," I interrupted. "I understand exactly where I stand." I walked out of the conference room, leaving Robert standing alone among the scattered papers and empty coffee cups. As I made my way back to my desk, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, but I kept walking, my mind racing with anger and humiliation. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I completed my assigned tasks mechanically, responding to emails and attending meetings while my thoughts churned with resentment and uncertainty. Robert avoided me, which was fine because I wasn't sure I could have a civil conversation with him anyway. As evening approached and the office began to empty out, I found myself once again alone at my desk, staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. My phone buzzed with another text from Lisa. "How did the presentation go?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Not great. I'll tell you about it when I get home." But I didn't go home. Instead, I stayed at my desk thinking about Robert's words, about 6 years of my life that suddenly felt wasted, about a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. The cleaning crew arrived and worked around me, emptying trash cans and vacuuming the carpeted areas between cubicles. Around 11 o'clock, I finally decided to pack up and leave. As I was shutting down my computer, I noticed a light still on in one of the corner offices. Patricia Williams was still working, her silhouette visible through the frosted glass of her office door. On an impulse I couldn't quite explain, I walked over and knocked softly. "Come in," she called out. Patricia looked up from a stack of documents as I entered her office. At 45, she was one of the youngest partners in the firm's history, known for her analytical mind and strategic thinking. Her office reflected her personality, organized, efficient, with awards and diplomas arranged precisely on the walls. "Working late again?" she asked with a slight smile. "Seems to be a habit," I replied. "I noticed your light was on and thought I'd check if you needed anything before I left." Patricia set down her pen and studied me for a moment. "Actually, I'm glad you stopped by. I wanted to talk to you about today's presentation." My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. The final nail in the coffin. "I've been thinking about your analysis," Patricia continued, "and I have to say, I was impressed with the depth of your research and the creativity of your solutions." I blinked in surprise. "Really? Really? Your cost reduction strategies were innovative without being reckless, and your financial projections were based on solid methodology." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I was somewhat puzzled by the pushback you received during the presentation. I wasn't sure how to respond. Criticizing Robert to a partner seemed like career suicide, but staying silent felt like accepting defeat. I put a lot of work into that analysis," I said finally. "I believe in the recommendations I made." Patricia nodded slowly. I could tell. That kind of conviction is rare in consulting. Too often, people present what they think clients want to hear rather than what they actually need to hear. She stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights below. "Can I ask you something? Do you enjoy working here?" The question caught me off guard. Yes, I do. Most of the time." "Most of the time?" I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I enjoy the work itself. The analysis, the problem solving, the client interaction. But sometimes I feel like there are obstacles that shouldn't exist, barriers that prevent good work from reaching its full potential." Patricia turned back to face me, her expression thoughtful. "That's an interesting way to put it. Barriers that prevent good work from reaching its full potential." She returned to her desk and picked up a folder that I hadn't noticed before. "I've been reviewing performance evaluations for the past few years, preparing for some strategic planning discussions with the board. Your name comes up frequently in client feedback reports." "It does. Always positive. Clients consistently praise your thoroughness, your communication skills, and your ability to find solutions they hadn't considered." She opened the folder and glanced at the contents. "In fact, 3 different clients have specifically requested that you be assigned to their future projects." This was news to me. Robert had never mentioned any client requests. "I didn't know that," I said. "I'm not surprised," Patricia replied with a knowing look. "Information doesn't always flow freely in organizations, especially when it might challenge existing power structures." We stood in silence for a moment, and I sensed that Patricia was trying to tell me something without saying it directly. "Well," I said finally, "I should let you get back to your work. Thank you for the feedback about the presentation." "Of course," Patricia said, but as I turned to leave, she spoke again. "One more thing. I'd like you to prepare a comprehensive analysis of our department's operational efficiency. Include everything: project timelines, resource allocation, client satisfaction metrics, cost structures. I want a complete picture of how we're performing and where we can improve." I turned back, intrigued. "What's the timeline for something like that?" "Take your time and do it right. This isn't for a client, it's for internal strategic planning. I'd rather have a thorough analysis in 3 weeks than a rushed one in 3 days." As I walked to the elevator, my mind was spinning with questions. Why had Patricia asked me to conduct an operational analysis of my own department? Why had she emphasized that client feedback about my work was consistently positive? And why did I get the feeling that today's humiliation in the conference room might somehow be connected to tonight's unexpected conversation? The elevator doors opened, and as I stepped inside, I caught my reflection in the polished metal. I looked tired, older than my 32 years, but there was something else in my expression that I hadn't seen in a long time: curiosity about what tomorrow might bring. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Patricia's request for an operational analysis had given me something concrete to focus on, a project that felt important rather than just another routine assignment. I spent the first hour of the day outlining my approach, identifying the data sources I would need and the metrics that would provide the most meaningful insights. Robert was notably absent from the morning department meeting, which was unusual for him. His assistant mentioned that he had called in sick, though she seemed uncertain about the details. Without his presence, the meeting had a different energy, more collaborative and less tense. Several of my colleagues approached me afterward to discuss ongoing projects, and I noticed they seemed more relaxed than usual. "Hey, great analysis on the Meridian Industries project," said Jennifer Walsh, one of the other senior consultants. "I read through your recommendations last night and I think they're spot on." "Thanks," I replied, surprised by her openness. I wasn't sure how it was received after yesterday's presentation. Jennifer glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard, then lowered her voice. "Between you and me, I think some people around here are threatened by good work. Don't let it get you down." Her words were encouraging, but they also confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Yesterday's confrontation with Robert wasn't really about my analysis or my attitude. It was about something deeper, something that had been building for longer than I had realized. I spent the next several days immersing myself in the operational analysis, requesting data from various departments and conducting informal interviews with colleagues about workflow efficiency and resource allocation. What I discovered was both enlightening and troubling. Our department was actually performing much better than I had expected. Client satisfaction scores were consistently high, project completion rates exceeded industry standards, and our profit margins were healthy. However, there were significant inefficiencies in how work was distributed and managed, inefficiencies that seemed to stem from a lack of communication between different levels of the organization. More troubling was what I discovered about project assignments and client relationships. Several times over the past 2 years, projects that I had initiated or played a major role in developing had been reassigned at the last minute, with the final presentations given by other consultants or by Robert himself. The official explanation was always about resource allocation or client preferences, but the pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. As I dug deeper into the data, I began to understand why Patricia had asked me to conduct this analysis. The inefficiencies I was documenting weren't random. They were systemic, stemming from management practices that prioritized control over performance. On Thursday afternoon, as I was reviewing client feedback reports in the firm's database, I came across something that made me pause. There was a folder labeled Executive Review Materials that I had never seen before, containing documents that were apparently generated automatically by the system but not normally visible to individual users. Curious, I clicked on the folder and found detailed breakdowns of individual consultant performance metrics, including information about project profitability, client retention rates, and revenue generation. What I saw made my blood run cold. According to the data, I was responsible for generating more revenue per project than any other consultant in the department, including Robert. My client retention rate was 94%, compared to a department average of 78%. In terms of profitability, my projects consistently exceeded budget expectations by an average of 15%. But what really shocked me was a series of internal memos between Robert and the partners, discussing my performance and future with the company. The most recent memo, dated just 2 weeks ago, contained a recommendation from Robert that I be managed more closely to ensure appropriate integration with department objectives. The memo went on to suggest that my independent approach to client relationships was potentially disruptive to established hierarchies, and that I might benefit from additional oversight and guidance. Reading between the lines, it was clear that Robert saw me not as an asset to be developed, but as a threat to be contained. I printed out the most relevant documents and locked them in my desk drawer, my hands shaking slightly from anger and disbelief. For 6 years, I had been loyal to this company, working extra hours, sacrificing personal time, believing that hard work and good results would be rewarded. Now I was learning that my success had actually made me a target. That evening, I decided to stop by Patricia's office again. I found her working late as usual, reviewing what appeared to be strategic planning documents. "How's the operational analysis coming along?" she asked as I knocked on her open door. "It's revealing," I said carefully. "I'm finding some interesting patterns in the data." Patricia gestured for me to sit down. "What kind of patterns?" I chose my words carefully, not wanting to sound like I was simply complaining about Robert, but needing to share what I had discovered. "There seems to be a disconnect between individual performance metrics and project assignments," I began. Some of our highest performing consultants are being underutilized, while others with lower performance metrics are getting high-profile assignments. Patricia leaned back in her chair, her expression neutral but attentive. Can you be more specific? Well, for example, client retention rates vary significantly among consultants, but project assignments don't seem to correlate with those rates. It's almost as if client preferences aren't being factored into staffing decisions. Interesting, Patricia said. What do you think might explain that disconnect? This was the moment of truth. I could play it safe, offer some generic explanation about resource constraints or scheduling conflicts. Or I could tell Patricia what I really thought was happening. I think there might be some internal politics affecting business decisions, I said finally. Patricia nodded slowly as if this wasn't surprising news. Internal politics. Can you elaborate? I've noticed that information about client feedback and performance metrics doesn't always reach the people who need it most. It's possible that some management decisions are being made based on incomplete information. Or based on different priorities altogether, Patricia added quietly. We sat in silence for a moment, and I had the distinct feeling that Patricia knew much more about the situation than she was letting on. Let me ask you something, she said finally. If you were running this department, what changes would you make? The question surprised me. Hypothetically. Let's say yes, hypothetically. I thought for a moment, then decided to be completely honest. I would restructure project assignments to better match consultant strengths with client needs. I would create more direct communication channels between consultants and clients. And I would implement performance-based advancement rather than purely tenure-based advancement. Those are significant changes, Patricia observed. They would require a very different management approach. They would require managers who are more interested in department success than in protecting their own authority, I said, then immediately worried that I had gone too far. But Patricia just smiled. That's exactly what I was hoping you would say. Before I could ask what she meant, Patricia's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. I need to take this, she said, then answered the phone. Hello, James. I could only hear Patricia's side of the conversation, but it was clear that James Mitchell, the senior partner, was calling about something important. Yes, I've been reviewing the files, Patricia said. I think we need to schedule a meeting with the full board as soon as possible. No, it can't wait until next month. Because the situation is affecting client relationships, and that affects our bottom line. After a few more minutes of conversation, Patricia hung up and turned back to me. I'm sorry, but I need to handle this. Can we continue our discussion tomorrow? Of course, I said, standing to leave. Thank you for listening to my thoughts about the analysis. Thank you for your honesty, Patricia replied. It's refreshing. As I walked back to my desk to gather my things, I noticed that Robert's office was still dark. His assistant had mentioned that he would be out for the rest of the week, though she hadn't provided any details about his illness. Given the timing of his absence, I couldn't help but wonder if it was related to the tension that seemed to be building throughout the department. The next morning, Friday, I arrived at the office to find an unusual level of activity. Several people I didn't recognize were in the conference room with James Mitchell and Patricia Williams, and there seemed to be important conversations happening behind closed doors. Jennifer Walsh stopped by my desk around 10 o'clock looking concerned. Have you heard anything about what's going on upstairs? She asked quietly. No, why? There are rumors about some kind of emergency board meeting. And Robert's secretary told me he's been asked to stay home until further notice. My stomach tightened. Stay home until further notice? That doesn't sound like a sick day. No, it doesn't, Jennifer agreed. And Patricia Williams has been asking for files related to project management and client relationships. It feels like some kind of investigation. Before I could respond, Patricia appeared at my cubicle. Could I speak with you privately? She asked. I followed her to a small conference room near her office, my mind racing with possibilities. Once the door was closed, Patricia got straight to the point. I need to ask you some direct questions about your experiences working with Robert Harrison. The formal use of Robert's full name sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't a casual conversation. What kind of experiences? I asked. Any instances where you felt your work was misrepresented, where client relationships were interfered with, or where information was withheld that affected your ability to do your job effectively? I realized that this was the moment I had been unconsciously preparing for since Tuesday's confrontation. Patricia wasn't asking me to speculate or offer opinions. She was asking for facts. There have been several instances, I said carefully. Would you like specific examples? Please. For the next hour, I detailed everything I could remember. Projects that had been reassigned without explanation, client feedback that had never been shared with me, presentations where my work had been undermined or misrepresented. Patricia took careful notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. "Has Robert ever spoken to you directly about these issues?" she asked. "This past Tuesday, after the Meridian Industries presentation, he told me that I didn't understand my place in the organization," I said. "He said I was nothing, just a number on a spreadsheet." Patricia's pen stopped moving. "He said you were nothing?" "Yes." It was after he had contradicted several points in my presentation, making it look like my analysis was flawed when I knew it wasn't. "Were there witnesses to this conversation?" "No, we were alone in the conference room." Patricia finished writing and set down her pen. "I want you to know that what you've shared with me is consistent with other information we've been gathering. You're not the only person who has had these experiences. Other people have complained about Robert? Let's just say that patterns have emerged that require investigation," Patricia said diplomatically. She stood up, signaling that our conversation was over. "I need to ask you to keep this discussion confidential while we complete our review. Can you do that?" "Of course. And I need to ask you to continue with the operational analysis. In fact, I'd like you to expand it to include specific recommendations for organizational restructuring." As I walked back to my desk, my mind was spinning. It was clear that something significant was happening, something that went beyond just my personal conflict with Robert. The emergency board meeting, the investigation, the request for detailed information about departmental operations, it all pointed to major changes coming to the company. The rest of Friday passed quietly, but I could feel the tension in the air. Colleagues whispered in small groups, then dispersed when managers approached. Phone calls were made behind closed doors. The normal rhythm of the office had been disrupted by an undercurrent of uncertainty and speculation. I left work that evening with more questions than answers, but for the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful about the future. Whatever was happening, it felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. Monday morning arrived with an atmosphere I had never experienced in my 6 years at Mitchell & Associates. The office buzzed with nervous energy as news spread that Robert Harrison had been asked to take an extended leave of absence pending an internal review. The official announcement came from James Mitchell himself, delivered in a brief all-hands meeting that raised more questions than it answered. "We are committed to maintaining the highest standards of professional conduct and operational excellence," James had said, his tone formal and measured. "During this transition period, Patricia Williams will be overseeing day-to-day operations in the consulting department." After the announcement, I returned to my desk to find a message from Patricia asking me to meet with her and James Mitchell that afternoon. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the main conference room, and the formal nature of the request made me both nervous and curious about what they wanted to discuss. I spent the morning putting the finishing touches on my operational analysis, incorporating the organizational recommendations Patricia had requested. The document had grown to over 40 pages of detailed analysis, including specific suggestions for restructuring project assignments, improving client communication, and implementing performance-based advancement criteria. At exactly 2 o'clock, I knocked on the conference room door and was invited in by James Mitchell. Besides James and Patricia, there was a woman I didn't recognize, professionally dressed and carrying a leather portfolio that suggested she might be from outside the company. "Please have a seat," James said, gesturing to a chair across from them. "I'd like you to meet Caroline Thompson from our legal department." My heart rate increased slightly. The presence of legal counsel suggested that this meeting was more serious than I had anticipated. "Thank you for joining us," Caroline said with a professional smile. "We're conducting a comprehensive review of departmental operations, and your insights have been particularly valuable in helping us understand certain patterns and practices." Patricia leaned forward slightly. "We've reviewed the operational analysis you prepared, and I have to say, it's one of the most thorough and insightful documents I've seen in my 15 years with this company." "Thank you," I replied, unsure of where this conversation was heading. James opened a folder in front of him and pulled out several documents. "Based on your analysis and other information we've gathered, it's become clear that there have been systemic issues in the management of the consulting department. Issues that have affected both employee performance and client relationships." Caroline took over the conversation. "We've discovered evidence of project mismanagement, suppression of performance data, and what appears to be deliberate interference with client relationships. These practices have not only created a hostile work environment for several employees but have also cost the company significant revenue. I listened in stunned silence as Caroline outlined the scope of what they had uncovered. It wasn't just about my experiences with Robert, it was a pattern of behavior that had affected multiple consultants over several years. 3 clients have filed formal complaints about communication breakdowns and project management issues, Patricia added. In each case, the problems stemmed from decisions made at the departmental management level that directly contradicted the recommendations of the assigned consultants. The Meridian Industries situation was apparently the final straw, James said. They called me directly on Wednesday to express concerns about the presentation you gave last week. My stomach dropped. Concerns about my presentation? Concerns about the way your presentation was handled? James clarified. They were impressed with your analysis and confused by the pushback you received during the meeting. They wanted to know if there were internal conflicts affecting our ability to serve their needs effectively. I felt a wave of relief mixed with vindication. So they weren't dissatisfied with my work? On the contrary, Patricia said, they specifically requested that you be the lead consultant on their account going forward. They said your cost reduction strategies were exactly what they needed, and they were puzzled by the resistance you encountered from your own management. Caroline opened her portfolio and pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. We need to ask you some specific questions about your experiences, particularly regarding project assignments and client interactions. This information will be used to determine appropriate corrective actions and to ensure that similar problems don't occur in the future. For the next 90 minutes, I answered detailed questions about every significant project I had worked on over the past 2 years. They asked about client feedback I had received, projects that had been reassigned, and instances where I felt my professional judgment had been undermined or overruled without justification. The process was thorough but not confrontational. Caroline and Patricia asked follow-up questions that demonstrated they had done their homework, cross-referencing my experiences with documented evidence from client files and internal communications. One final question, James said as the interview seemed to be winding down. If you were offered the opportunity to restructure the consulting department according to your recommendations, what would be your first priority? The question caught me off guard. My first priority? Yes. If you had the authority to implement changes, what would you focus on immediately? I thought for a moment, then decided to give them the honest answer rather than what I thought they might want to hear. I would establish direct communication channels between consultants and clients, I said. Too many problems stem from information being filtered or altered as it moves up and down the management hierarchy. Clients should have confidence that their feedback and concerns are reaching the people who are actually doing the work. Patricia and James exchanged a meaningful glance, and I had the feeling that my answer had confirmed something they were already thinking. That's a very mature perspective, Caroline observed. It shows that you understand the importance of client relationships in driving business success. After the meeting concluded, Patricia asked me to stay behind for a few minutes. How are you feeling about all of this? She asked once we were alone. Honestly, I'm not sure, I replied. Part of me is relieved that I wasn't imagining the problems I was experiencing. But part of me is concerned about what happens next. What do you mean? Well, if Robert is removed from his position, there's going to be a significant reorganization. I'm not sure how that affects people like me who were perceived as being in conflict with the previous management. Patricia smiled. I think you're underestimating how valuable you are to this organization. The problems you experienced weren't because of anything you did wrong. They were because you were doing things right in an environment that wasn't structured to reward excellence. She gathered her papers and stood up. I'd like you to continue working on operational improvements, but I want you to expand your scope. Think about how we can restructure not just project assignments, but the entire departmental hierarchy to better serve our clients and our employees. That's a pretty significant responsibility, I said. Yes, it is. Are you interested in taking it on? As I walked back to my desk, I felt like I was in a surreal alternate reality. Less than a week ago, my boss had told me I was nothing, and now the partners were asking me to redesign the entire department structure. It was overwhelming, but it was also the most energizing challenge I had been given in years. The rest of the week flew by as I threw myself into the expanded analysis. I interviewed consultants throughout the department, gathering their perspectives on workflow inefficiencies and management obstacles. I reviewed client feedback reports going back 3 years, looking for patterns in complaints and compliments. I analyzed project profitability data to identify which approaches consistently delivered the best results for both the company and the clients. What emerged was a clear picture of a department with tremendous potential that had been held back by poor management practices. The individual consultants were talented and dedicated, but they had been working in a system that discouraged innovation and punished independent thinking. On Friday afternoon, I was putting the finishing touches on my comprehensive restructuring proposal when Patricia stopped by my desk with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked. "There's something I need to discuss with you." We walked to her office and she closed the door behind us. The blinds were already drawn, creating a sense of privacy that felt both intimate and serious. "The board met this morning to review our findings from the departmental investigation," Patricia began, settling into her chair behind the desk. "The evidence of mismanagement was even more extensive than we initially thought." I waited for her to continue, sensing that there was more to this conversation than a simple update. "Robert Harrison's employment has been terminated, effective immediately," she said. "The board determined that his actions created a hostile work environment, interfered with client relationships, and cost the company substantial revenue through misallocated resources and missed opportunities." The news wasn't entirely surprising given everything that had transpired over the past week, but hearing it stated so definitively felt surreal. "What happens to the department now?" I asked. Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "That's what I want to talk to you about. Your restructuring proposal is remarkable. It's comprehensive, well-researched, and it addresses every major inefficiency we've identified. More importantly, it's practical. These aren't theoretical suggestions. They're actionable solutions that could be implemented immediately." "Thank you," I said, though I sensed there was more coming. "James and I have been discussing the future leadership of the consulting department," Patricia continued. "We need someone who understands both the operational challenges and the client relationship dynamics. Someone who has demonstrated the ability to think strategically while maintaining attention to detail." My heart began to race as I realized where this conversation might be heading. "We've also been reviewing performance data from the past several years," she went on, "and there's one person whose work consistently stands out in terms of client satisfaction, project profitability, and innovative problem-solving." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air between us. "Are you offering me Robert's position?" I asked quietly. "We're offering you the opportunity to rebuild the consulting department from the ground up, using your restructuring proposal as the foundation," Patricia replied. "The title would be Director of Consulting Services, with full authority over project assignments, client relationships, and departmental operations." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. A week ago, I had been convinced that my career at Mitchell & Associates was over. Now I was being offered the chance to lead the entire department. "I'm honored by the offer," I said carefully, "but I have to ask, why me? I'm sure there are other senior consultants with more experience in management roles." Patricia smiled. "Experience in management isn't the same thing as capability for leadership. You've already demonstrated leadership by identifying problems, proposing solutions, and maintaining your professional integrity even when it put you at personal risk." She opened a folder on her desk and pulled out a document I recognized as my performance evaluation from the previous year. "Every client you've worked with over the past 3 years has requested you for follow-up projects," she said. "Your project completion rate is 98%, compared to a department average of 85%. Your cost estimates are accurate within 2%, while the department average is off by 12%. The statistics were impressive, but I knew they didn't tell the complete story." "Those numbers are good," I acknowledged, "but leading a department is different from being an individual contributor. I've never managed a team before." "No, you haven't," Patricia agreed. "But you've been leading unofficially for years. Jennifer Walsh told us that junior consultants regularly come to you for guidance because you're patient and thorough in your explanations. Michael Torres said you helped him salvage a project that was headed for disaster, and he credited you with teaching him analytical techniques that made him a better consultant." I hadn't realized that my informal mentoring of colleagues had been noticed by the partners, but it made sense that they would have asked around about my leadership potential. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "The Meridian Industries executives called James this morning. They want to expand their engagement with us, but only if you're the lead consultant on the project. They were so impressed with your analysis that they're considering using us for a company-wide operational review that could be worth over $2 million in fees." The number was staggering. A $2 million project would be one of the largest in the company's history. "They specifically said they want to work with someone who understands their business and isn't afraid to challenge conventional thinking," Patricia added. "That's you." I sat in silence for a moment, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. It wasn't just a promotion, It was an opportunity to reshape an entire department, to implement ideas I had been developing for years, to create the kind of work environment I had always wished existed. What would be the timeline for implementation? I asked. We'd like to announce your appointment on Monday, Patricia said. The restructuring would begin immediately, with full implementation over the next 6 weeks. And I would have complete authority over departmental operations? Complete authority, with the understanding that major strategic decisions would be discussed with the partners as part of our normal governance process. But day-to-day management, project assignments, client relationships, hiring decisions, all of that would be your responsibility. I thought about Lisa, about our conversation the night before when I had finally told her everything that had happened over the past week. She had listened carefully, then said something that stuck with me. Maybe this is the universe's way of telling you that you're ready for something bigger. I accept, I said, the words coming out before I had fully processed the decision intellectually. Patricia's face broke into a wide smile. Excellent. James will be thrilled. She stood up and extended her hand, and as we shook, I felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervous energy. There's one more thing, Patricia said as we concluded our handshake. The board has approved a compensation package that reflects the increased responsibilities of the position. Your new salary will be $120,000, plus performance bonuses based on departmental profitability. The number was nearly 40% more than my current salary, enough to finally start thinking seriously about the future Lisa and I had been planning together. When do I tell the rest of the department? I asked. James will make the announcement at Monday's all-hands meeting, Patricia replied. Until then, I'd appreciate it if you kept this confidential. As I walked back to my desk, I felt like I was floating. The fluorescent lights that had seemed oppressive just a week ago now seemed bright and energizing. The conversations and keyboard clicks that filled the office sounded like the productive hum of a successful business rather than the anxious noise of people worried about their job security. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing my restructuring proposal one more time, making notes about implementation priorities and timeline considerations. For the first time in years, I left the office at exactly 5 o'clock, eager to share the news with Lisa. I found her at home, still in her scrubs from her shift at the hospital. She was sitting at our small kitchen table, grading papers for a continuing education course she was teaching on weekends. "How was your day?" she asked as I walked in, the same question she asked every evening. But tonight my answer was different. "Eventful," I said, sitting down across from her. "Very eventful." I told her everything from the investigation to the restructuring proposal to the job offer. She listened with growing amazement, occasionally asking questions but mostly just letting me talk through the incredible sequence of events. "So you're saying that in 1 week, you went from being told you were nothing to being offered the directorship of your entire department?" she said when I finished. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Lisa shook her head in disbelief. "And this $2 million client specifically requested you?" "Apparently so." She stood up and came around the table to hug me. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "Not because of the promotion but because you never compromised your integrity, even when it seemed like it might cost you everything." As we held each other in our modest apartment kitchen, I thought about all the late nights and missed dinners, all the times I had wondered if my hard work would ever be recognized and rewarded. It had taken 6 years, but the recognition had finally come in a way that exceeded my wildest expectations. "So what happens on Monday?" Lisa asked. "Monday," I said, "everything changes." Monday morning felt like the first day of a new life. I arrived at the office 30 minutes early not because I had to, but because I was too excited to stay home any longer. The familiar lobby of Mitchell & Associates looked different somehow, as if I was seeing it through new eyes. The security guard, Pete, whom I had greeted every morning for 6 years, seemed surprised by my unusually cheerful demeanor. "Good morning, Pete. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It sure is," he replied with a puzzled smile. "You're in a good mood today." "Yes, I am," I said, realizing that I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this optimistic about going to work. The elevator ride to the 20th floor gave me a few minutes to collect my thoughts and prepare for what was about to be one of the most important days of my career. In just a few hours, James Mitchell would announce my appointment as Director of Consulting Services, and everything I had worked toward for the past 6 years would culminate in this opportunity to lead and reshape the department. As I walked through the office, I noticed that several of my colleagues were already at their desks, preparing for the all-hands meeting that had been scheduled for 9 o'clock. There was an air of anticipation and nervous energy throughout the department. Everyone knew that significant changes were coming. They just didn't know exactly what those changes would entail. Jennifer Walsh looked up as I passed her cubicle. "Any idea what this meeting is about?" she asked quietly. "I think we'll all find out together," I replied, trying to keep my expression neutral despite the excitement I felt building inside. At exactly 9 o'clock, the entire consulting department gathered in the main conference room. James Mitchell stood at the front of the room, flanked by Patricia Williams and Caroline Thompson from the legal department. The formal setup suggested that this wasn't going to be a routine status update. "Thank you all for being here this morning," James began, his voice carrying the authority that came with being the senior partner of a successful consulting firm. "As many of you know, we've been conducting a comprehensive review of our departmental operations over the past week." He paused, scanning the faces in the room before continuing. "This review has revealed both significant challenges and tremendous opportunities. We've identified operational inefficiencies that have been limiting our growth potential, but we've also discovered that we have exceptional talent within our organization that hasn't been fully utilized." I could feel my heart racing as James moved toward the announcement I knew was coming. Effective immediately, Robert Harrison is no longer with the company. The board has determined that changes in departmental leadership are necessary to ensure that we can continue to serve our clients with the excellence they deserve. A murmur of surprised conversation rippled through the room. While rumors had been circulating about Robert's extended absence, the confirmation of his termination still came as a shock to many of my colleagues. "I'm pleased to announce that we have appointed a new director of consulting services," James continued, and the room fell silent. "This individual has demonstrated exceptional analytical capabilities, client relationship skills, and strategic thinking. Most importantly, they have shown the integrity and leadership qualities necessary to rebuild our department according to the highest professional standards." He turned slightly and made eye contact with me. "Please join me in congratulating our new director of consulting services." The moment felt surreal as my name echoed through the conference room. I stood up slowly, acutely aware that every eye in the room was focused on me. There were expressions of surprise, confusion, and in some cases, what looked like genuine pleasure at the news. Jennifer Walsh was the first to start clapping, followed quickly by Michael Torres and several other colleagues. Within moments, the entire room was applauding, and I felt a wave of emotion that I hadn't expected. "Thank you," I said, my voice slightly shaky with emotion. "This is an incredible honor, and I want you all to know that I don't take this responsibility lightly." James nodded for me to continue, and I realized that this was my first opportunity to address the department as their new leader. "Over the past 6 years, I've had the privilege of working with each of you in various capacities," I began, my confidence growing as I spoke. "I've seen the exceptional work that this department produces, and I've also seen how external factors have sometimes prevented that work from reaching its full potential." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "My goal as your new director is to create an environment where excellent work is recognized, where client relationships are prioritized, and where every member of this department has the opportunity to grow and advance based on their contributions to our collective success." The response was positive, with several people nodding in agreement and a few more smiles appearing around the room. "I'll be scheduling individual meetings with each of you over the next 2 weeks to discuss your career goals, your project preferences, and your ideas for how we can improve our operations," I continued. "This department's success depends on all of us working together, and I want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard in our planning process." After the meeting concluded, I was approached by several colleagues who wanted to offer their congratulations and express their thoughts about the changes ahead. The conversations were encouraging, with most people expressing optimism about the new direction of the department. "I have to admit, I was worried about what would happen after Robert left," Michael Torres told me privately. "But if anyone can turn this department around, it's you. You've always been someone people could count on for honest advice and quality work." "Thank you, Michael. That means a lot coming from you." "I'm serious," he continued. "You've helped me out more times than I can count, always without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of leadership this department needs." As the day progressed, I began the process of transitioning into my new role. Patricia provided me with access to departmental budgets, client contracts, and strategic planning documents that I had never seen before. The scope of responsibility was larger than I had fully appreciated, but it was also more exciting than I had imagined. The Meridian Industries project, which had been the catalyst for so much of the recent upheaval, was indeed moving forward with an expanded scope. The client had specifically requested that I remain as the lead consultant, and they were eager to begin the company-wide operational review that could potentially be worth over $2 million in fees. "They want to schedule a follow-up meeting for Thursday," Patricia informed me as we reviewed the contract details. This time, you'll be presenting not just as the lead consultant, but as the director of the department. It's amazing how quickly things can change, I reflected. A week ago, I thought that project was a disaster. A week ago, it was being managed by someone who was more concerned with protecting his authority than with serving the client's needs, Patricia replied. Now it's being managed by someone who understands that client success and company success are the same thing. That evening, I called my parents to share the news of my promotion. My father, a retired engineer who had always emphasized the importance of hard work and persistence, was particularly pleased. "I always knew you had it in you," he said over the phone. "Sometimes it just takes time for other people to recognize what's already there." "It wasn't just time, Dad," I replied. "It was also being in the right situation at the right moment." If Robert hadn't pushed things too far, if Patricia hadn't been paying attention to what was happening in the department, if the clients hadn't spoken up about their concerns, any number of things could have gone differently. "Maybe so," my father acknowledged, "but you still had to be ready when the opportunity came. And you had to have the courage to stand up for what you believed was right, even when it seemed like it might hurt your career." His words reminded me of how close I had come to simply accepting Robert's treatment and trying to keep my head down until things improved. If I had chosen that path, none of this would have been possible. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into the work of restructuring the department. I conducted detailed interviews with each consultant, learning about their career aspirations, their project preferences, and their ideas for operational improvements. What I discovered was a group of talented, motivated professionals who had been frustrated by the previous management structure but were excited about the possibility of change. The individual meetings also revealed specific instances of mismanagement that I hadn't been aware of. 3 different consultants told me about projects where their recommendations had been overruled or modified without explanation, leading to client dissatisfaction and reduced project profitability. 2 others described situations where they had been excluded from client meetings despite being the primary analysts on the projects. "It felt like we were doing all the work but getting none of the credit," Jennifer Walsh explained during her interview. "Robert would take our analysis, present it as his own insights, and then make changes that we knew wouldn't work as well for the client. That's not going to happen anymore," I assured her. "Moving forward, the consultants who do the analytical work will be the ones presenting it to clients. You'll have direct relationships with the people you're serving, and you'll get credit for the value you create." The new project assignment system I implemented was based on matching consultant strengths with client needs rather than simply distributing work based on availability or seniority. Jennifer, who had a background in supply chain management, was assigned to lead a logistics optimization project for a manufacturing client. Michael, whose analytical skills were particularly strong in financial modeling, became the lead consultant for a banking client who needed help with risk assessment procedures. The results were immediate and dramatic. Client satisfaction scores improved significantly, project completion times decreased, and the quality of our analytical work reached new levels. More importantly, the consultants in the department seemed energized and engaged in a way that I hadn't seen during Robert's tenure. The Meridian Industries project became a showcase for our new approach. Instead of filtering all client communication through management, I established direct relationships between the Meridian executives and the consultants who were working on their operational review. This allowed for real-time feedback, faster problem resolution, and a much more collaborative approach to developing solutions. "This is exactly what we were hoping for when we hired Mitchell and Associates," the Meridian CEO told me during one of our progress meetings. "We're getting insights that are both innovative and practical, and we feel like we're working with partners rather than just vendors." The success of the restructuring efforts didn't go unnoticed by the firm's senior leadership. 3 months after my appointment as director, James Mitchell called me into his office for a conversation that would once again change the trajectory of my career. "The board has been reviewing the performance metrics for your department," he began, "and the improvements have been remarkable. Client satisfaction is up 30%, project profitability is up 25%, and our employee retention rate is the highest it's been in 5 years. "Thank you," I replied. "It's been a team effort. The consultants in the department are incredibly talented. They just needed the right environment to showcase their abilities." "That's exactly the kind of leadership perspective that the board values," James continued. "Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you today." He leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We're expanding our consulting services to include strategic planning and organizational development," he said. "It's a natural extension of our existing capabilities, but it requires someone who understands both the analytical and the relationship aspects of consulting. I waited for him to continue, sensing that there was a significant opportunity being presented. "We'd like you to head up this expansion as a partner in the firm," James said. "It would mean equity ownership, a seat on the board of directors, and responsibility for building an entirely new division from the ground up." The offer was beyond anything I had imagined when I first walked into the Mitchell & Associates offices 6 years earlier as a junior analyst. Partnership in a consulting firm was typically reserved for people with decades of experience and established client networks. To be offered this opportunity at 32 was extraordinary. "I'm honored by the offer," I said, "but I want to make sure I understand what would be expected." "You'd be responsible for developing the strategic planning practice, hiring and training consultants, building client relationships, and generating revenue targets that we'd establish together," James explained. "It's essentially an entrepreneurial opportunity within an established firm." As we discussed the details of the partnership offer, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months earlier, I had been a senior consultant worried about job security and frustrated by a management structure that seemed designed to limit my potential. Now I was being invited to become an owner of the business and to build something new from the foundation up. "Can I have some time to think about it?" I asked. "Of course," James replied. "Take all the time you need. But I hope you'll seriously consider it. You've already proven that you can lead people and deliver results. This would be an opportunity to do that on a much larger scale." That evening, I met Lisa for dinner at our favorite restaurant to discuss the partnership offer. We have been talking about our future together more frequently since my promotion to director, and this opportunity would accelerate many of our plans. "So you'd be a partner," she said, still processing the magnitude of what I was telling her. "Like an owner of the company." "A minority owner, but yes, essentially an owner with equity and voting rights on major decisions." Lisa shook her head in amazement. "6 months ago you were convinced your career was stalling out. Now you're being offered a partnership in a consulting firm." "It doesn't feel real yet," I admitted. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me it's all been a mistake." "It's not a mistake," Lisa said firmly. "You earned this. You worked hard, you maintained your integrity when it would have been easier to compromise, and you found a way to turn a terrible situation into an opportunity for growth." As we talked through the implications of the partnership offer, I realized that accepting it would mean committing to Mitchell & Associates for the foreseeable future. It would also mean taking on a level of responsibility and risk that was entirely new for me. "What does your gut tell you?" Lisa asked. I thought about the question seriously. My analytical mind wanted to evaluate the financial projections, assess the market opportunity, and develop a comprehensive risk analysis. But my gut was telling me something simpler. This was the chance I had been preparing for without knowing it. "My gut tells me to say yes," I replied. "Then say yes." The next morning, I walked into James Mitchell's office with a decision that would reshape not just my career, but my entire life. "I accept your offer," I said simply. James smiled and extended his hand. "Welcome to the partnership. I think this is going to be the beginning of something remarkable." As we shook hands, I thought about Robert Harrison's words from that confrontational Tuesday just 6 months earlier, "You're nothing." At the time, those words had felt like a crushing verdict on my career and my potential. Now, standing in the senior partner's office as the newest member of the firm's leadership team, I understood that Robert had been wrong about almost everything. I wasn't nothing. I was someone who had learned to turn adversity into opportunity, who had discovered that integrity and hard work could triumph over politics and power games. The partnership announcement was made the following week at an all-hands company meeting. As I stood before my colleagues, many of whom had become friends and collaborators over the past several months, I felt a sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. When I first started working at Mitchell & Associates 6 years ago, I said, I thought success meant climbing the corporate ladder by following the rules and keeping my head down. I've learned that real success means creating value for clients, supporting your colleagues, and having the courage to advocate for what you believe is right. The applause that followed felt different from the polite recognition I had received when I was appointed director. This felt like genuine enthusiasm for the future we were building together. Over the following months, I worked with James and Patricia to develop the strategic planning division, hiring new consultants and establishing relationships with clients who needed help with organizational development and long-term planning. The division grew rapidly, generating over $5 million in revenue in its first year of operation. More importantly, the culture we had created in the consulting department became a model for the rest of the firm. Employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs, client retention rates improved across all divisions, and Mitchell & Associates was recognized by industry publications as one of the top consulting firms in the Northeast. 1 year after Robert Harrison had told me I was nothing, I was featured on the cover of Consulting Today magazine as one of the rising stars of strategic planning. The article described my journey from senior consultant to partner, emphasizing the innovative approaches to client relationships and organizational development that had become my signature. But the recognition that meant the most to me came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Walsh, who had been promoted to senior consultant and was leading some of our most important client engagements, stopped by my office one afternoon with something she wanted to share. "I got a call from a former colleague who's working at another consulting firm," she said. "She told me that Robert Harrison is working there now, and he's been bad-mouthing Mitchell & Associates, claiming that we only succeeded after he left because we lowered our standards." I felt a familiar flash of anger, but it was quickly replaced by something closer to pity. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her that our standards have never been higher," Jennifer replied. "I told her that we're doing the best work of our careers because we finally have leadership that values excellence over ego." As Jennifer left my office, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. The department that had once been characterized by fear, politics, and inefficiency had become a model of collaboration and innovation. The consultants who had felt undervalued and overlooked were now thriving in an environment that rewarded their contributions and supported their growth. Most importantly, I had learned that being told you're nothing by someone who lacks vision doesn't define your worth or limit your potential. It simply reveals their inability to recognize value when they see it. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I walked past the conference room where Robert had delivered his crushing verdict just 1 year earlier. The room looked the same, but everything else had changed. Tomorrow, I would use that same room to meet with clients who valued our insights, colleagues who respected our collaboration, and partners who trusted our judgment. I thought about calling Robert to tell him about the partnership, about the success of the restructuring, about the magazine cover and the industry recognition. But then I realized there was nothing I needed to prove to him. His opinion of my worth had been irrelevant then, and it was irrelevant now. Instead, I sent a text to Lisa, "Heading home now. How about that dinner I owe you?" Her response came quickly, "I thought you'd never ask." "I'm proud of you, partner." As I walked toward the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished metal doors. I looked older, more confident, and undeniably happier than I had a year ago. The fluorescent lights that had once seemed oppressive now illuminated a workspace where I had discovered my potential and built something meaningful. The elevator arrived, and as the doors opened, I smiled at the realization that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to prove that Robert Harrison had been spectacularly wrong about almost everything. I wasn't nothing. I was exactly who I was meant to be, and I was just getting started.